Long before the Palatine Hill was buried in imperial marble, early Rome was a settlement of wood and earth. The people who inhabited this landscape understood their relationship with the divine through a framework that is distinctly alien to modern audiences. We often hear that the Romans simply annexed the Greek Olympic pantheon, swapping out names like Zeus and Ares for Jupiter and Mars. But that assumes the early Latins were looking for the same things in religion that the Greeks were. They were not. The Greeks sought to explain the human condition through dramatic cosmogonies. They wrote epic poetry about flawed, human-shaped deities bickering, falling in love, and shaping the universe. Early Romans ignored these poetic origin stories. They had almost no interest in divine family trees or emotional gods. Roman religion prioritized orthopraxy, correct practice. It relied on the flawless execution of specific rituals rather than an internal state of faith, belief, or philosophical dogma. This practice served a strictly communal, functional purpose. A citizen performed a rite to ensure the grain harvest yielded a surplus, or to guarantee that a military campaign against a neighboring tribe would end in victory. Religion in early Rome operated as a rigid legal framework. Its entire goal was to maintain the pax deorum, the peace of the gods. The survival of the state depended on this contract, making religious neglect a literal threat to national security. At the center of this legal framework were the noumena. Instead of human-shaped characters walking the earth, a numen was an intangible, highly localized expression of divine power governing a very specific action. Reading Georges Dumézil's analysis of archaic Roman religion reveals the mechanical nature of these forces. The Latin word numen comes from a passive formation meaning that which is produced by nodding. It signifies the product or expression of a power, not a personality. These powers were embedded directly into the mechanics of agrarian survival. There were noumena, responsible for the boundary line of a specific field, the warmth of a household hearth, or the successful turning of soil with fertilizer. To harness these forces, the Romans relied on a binding contract summarized by the formula do ut des, I give that you might give. This contract was maintained through highly regulated sacrifices and vows, or vota. It required absolute precision. If a presiding magistrate stumbled over a single word in a public prayer, or if the sacrificial animal seemed unwilling, the contract was voided. The entire festival had to be restarted from the beginning. Dealing with the divine in Rome was a negotiation of physics. You did not worship a numen to earn its love. You executed the exact ritual inputs necessary to guarantee the exact material outputs your society needed to survive. How does an agrarian society, focused entirely on scattered local spirits, develop the highly structured state-level theology of the Roman Republic? The answer arrived in the 20th century through the mythographer Georges Dumézil. He applied the comparative Indo-European method to Rome, looking past surface-level Greek influences to uncover the deep ancestral structures of Roman thought. Dumézil introduced the tripartite ideology. He argued that ancient Indo-European societies conceptually divided the universe into three essential functions required to maintain a civilization. In Rome, this three-part blueprint manifested as the archaic triad, the central deities Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus. This triad was not a random collection of favorite gods. It was a comprehensive structural formula. Each deity managed a distinct pillar of society, and together they covered every requirement for a viable state. The first function belongs to Jupiter. He represents magical and juridical sovereignty. Jupiter oversees the fetiales, the priests responsible for diplomacy and declaring war. He serves as the ultimate guarantor of oaths, treaties, and legal boundaries. He provides the order that makes society possible. The second function is Mars. He provides warrior force and the physical protection of the state's youth. Unlike the Greek Ares, who often represented chaotic bloodlust, the Roman Mars embodied disciplined, patriotic duty. He was the force required to defend the law Jupiter established. Mars oversaw the ver sacrum, or sacred spring. In times of crisis, a generation of youth would be ritually expelled from the territory. Mars took charge of these young bands, guiding them to conquer and settle entirely new communities. Jupiter provided the law to govern the state, and Mars provided the force to defend and expand it. But together, they possessed no wealth. They could not feed the society they built. That requires the third function, represented by Quirinus: economic prosperity, fecundity, and the masses. Quirinus acted as the patron of the armed community during times of peace. He governed the agricultural wealth and civilian labor required to sustain the other two pillars.
The jurisdictions are entirely separate. Jupiter oversees the rulers and priests. Mars oversees the soldiers on campaign. Quirinus oversees citizens working the land. With the archaic triad complete, the Romans possessed a conceptual model of an architectonic society: law, force, and prosperity working in strict equilibrium to ensure survival. This leaves us with a paradox. If archaic Rome possessed this robust, three-part Indo-European ideology, why are there no surviving tales of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus shaping the cosmos? Dumazel's breakthrough is detailed in this text. He notes that while other cultures, like in Vedic India, elaborated this tripartite scheme into cosmic myths about the universe, the Romans historicized their mythological data. The Romans took their abstract theological functions and mapped them directly onto human actors. They disguised their mythology as the legendary history of their early kings. We see this clearly in the foundational myth of Rome: Romulus, the fated son of Mars, drawing the initial boundary lines of the city. According to the ancient historian Livy, Romulus establishes a city populated by warriors and fugitives. They have military strength and rudimentary laws, but they have no wives, no wealth, and no demographic future. This legend encodes the structural crisis of a city that possesses sovereignty and force, but lacks its third essential pillar. Romulus and his Latin followers represent the first and second functions. They possess Deus et virtutem, the favor of the gods and martial virtue. Nearby lives the Sabine tribe, led by Titus Tatius. They possess exactly what Rome lacks: opus, meaning agricultural wealth, and the women required for demographic continuity. The Sabines are the embodiment of the third function. The Romans abduct the Sabine women, sparking a brutal military conflict between the two unbalanced tribes. Because neither side represents a complete society, the war devolves into a hopeless stalemate. The legend reaches its climax when the Sabine women intervene. Running onto the battlefield, they physically force a peaceful integration of the two peoples. Looking at Dumazel's analysis of this resolution, he describes it as a three-stage formation of a complete city. The valences of the diverse elements reciprocally saturate each other. Following the peace, Romulus and Titus Tatius become colleagues ruling a single state. Cults to Jupiter and Quirinus are instituted side by side. The isolated functional components merge into a unified whole. Roman mythology was never missing. It was engineered into the very foundations of the state's historical identity, transforming abstract tripartite physics into an eternal blueprint for the glory of Rome. This leaves us. As Rome transitioned into a Mediterranean power, they faced a geopolitical disadvantage. Their Greek rivals claimed mythic histories stretching back to the dawn of time, leaving the Romans looking like uncultured newcomers. To bridge this gap, the Romans adopted a starting point in the ashes of Troy. Tradition held that as the city fell, a Trojan prince named Aeneas escaped the slaughter. He fled the burning city carrying his elderly father and his family's household gods on his back. This choice, prioritizing his father and his gods over his own safety, defined the virtue of pietas. It established a standard of duty and devotion to family and state that would become the backbone of Roman morality. Aeneas led the survivors across the sea to Italy, where he settled and laid the ancestral foundations for the people who would eventually build Rome. This origin story was codified centuries later by the poet Virgil in the Aeneid, a work designed to link Roman origins directly to the prestigious Greek epic tradition. Claiming direct lineage to the heroes of the Trojan War solved Rome's identity crisis. It recast a group of Italian upstarts as a civilization with an ancient, preordained destiny. While the Trojan story provided prestige, the actual founding of the city relied on a much grittier, localized legend. This myth tells of Romulus and Remus,
twins born to a Vestal virgin and Mars, the god of war. Abandoned as infants, they were left to die in the currents of the Tiber River. They were saved by a she-wolf, who discovered the boys on the riverbank and nursed them in her lair. Raised by a shepherd, the twins grew into ruthless leaders who eventually overthrew a tyrant to restore their family's throne in the city of Alba Longa. By embracing a myth of orphans raised by a predator, the Romans anchored their identity in rugged resilience. They were a people born of survival and struggle, a pragmatic contrast to Aeneas's noble poetry. As adults, the brothers clashed over where to build their own city. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, while Remus insisted on the Aventine. They attempted to settle the dispute by watching for omens in the flight of birds, but the ritual only fueled their resentment. Romulus began building a wall around his chosen hill in defiance. When Remus mockingly jumped over the new wall, Romulus struck him down. Romulus became the first king of the city he named Rome on April 21, 753 BC. This foundation in fratricide sent a clear message to the Roman world. The survival of the state and the authority of its walls superseded even the closest ties of blood. Early Roman religion was almost entirely functional. Their gods were forces tied to specific rituals and tasks, lacking the human personalities and dramatic lives found in other cultures. As Rome expanded south, they encountered Greek colonies with a sophisticated, narrative-driven mythology that the Roman system lacked. To fill this cultural vacuum, the state engaged in interpretatio Romana, the process of mapping their faceless deities onto corresponding Greek gods. This absorption provided Rome with a rich library of myths to inspire its citizens, while maintaining its traditional focus on public ritual and political order. The Romans systematically edited the Greek pantheon, stripping gods of their chaotic emotions and philosophical fickleness. The dramatic Greek Zeus was recast as the Roman Jupiter, a dignified, stern guardian of law, oaths, and the Roman state. The Romans transformed Ares, the reviled Greek god of bloodlust, into Mars, a noble, disciplined father of the Roman people and the protector of their armies. Where Greek myth explored the messy human condition, the Roman version existed to enforce civic virtue and collective loyalty. This redesigned pantheon became the final piece of the Roman blueprint, connecting the distant Trojan nobility of Aeneas to the pragmatic foundation of Romulus. By welding together borrowed epics, local grit, and modified gods, Rome constructed a narrative that aligned their very growth with divine order. It portrayed their expansion not as mere conquest, but as a preordained duty to rule.